Welcome to the WPF with MVVM add-on course for the Tournament Tracker application. I've been looking forward to producing this add-on course for a while. This course builds upon the Tournament Tracker application we built in the C# application from start to finish course. If you haven't already completed that course, I would encourage you to do so. While you may want to jump right into WPF, you really need to understand how the application was built before you replace the user interface. Now, when we built Tournament Tracker, one of our requirements was that the user interface could be easily replaceable. This course is going to do just that. We're going to build a new user interface in WPF with the MVVM pattern. For this, we will use Caliburn Micro, an MVVM framework that gives us a great platform to work from. If you aren't familiar with Caliburn Micro or MVVM, I would encourage you to watch my MVVM in WPF video on my YouTube channel. It will give you a good overview of the technologies we'll be using in this series. So let's take a look at our scenario for this course. Our scenario is we've been asked to replace our WinForm user interface in the Tournament Tracker application with a user interface designed in WPF. Now, I've added using MVVM in here, but probably the user wouldn't tell us that. But let's assume they did. So the functionality should stay the same, but our application should now use a more modern user interface. All right, so there's some keywords there. Application should stay the same. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're not coming back and saying, okay, now you've had a little bit of time to think about it. We want to change everything. The only thing we're really changing is our user interface. If we can help it, we're really not going to touch anything else. And so that leads right into my plan. Avoid touching the class library. This really is kind of important to talk about because the tendency is to go in there and say, oh man, you know what? I can make this change and that change. And those are great ideas, but you really need to separate out what you're doing from what you want to do. If you always just kind of get distracted by change this, change that, you'll never get anything done. So we're going to focus just on the user interface as much as possible. Now, it may mean we have to touch the class library a little bit if there are some either bugs we come across or if we need functionality that's just not there. The key, though, is we want this to be additive, meaning we don't take away by adding in animations and other classy things to make it look a little better, make it look a little more professional and modern. But we're not going to do that in this series. Number 4, take advantage of Caliburn Micro. And this is an important one because it really is the easy way to do the MVVM pattern. Caliburn Micro is kind of like saying we're not going to reinvent the wheel. And one of the examples I think I used in my YouTube video on MVVM and WPF was building a car before you drive it. So if we're going to do MVVM raw right in WPF, we can do that. But we kind of have to build a lot of this functionality ourselves and then implement it. Caliburn Micro has built all that functionality, made it really powerful for us, made it clean, it's made it simple in some ways. And so we're just taking that engine that they've built and using it to go down the highway. So we're definitely going to take advantage of Caliburn Micro, take advantage of the built-in tooling. We're going to try not to step outside of that and force things. We're going to try and fit into their system of building a MVVM application. And finally, we're going to cover the major MVVM topics. This really is about not just building an application, but also teaching how a real-world application would be built and used. So we're not going to shy away from some of the more advanced topics in MVVM. We're going to instead tackle them head-on and see how they would fit into a real-world application. Next, we're going to keep it simple. And that may be a little bit at odds with using the major MVVM topics or MVVM in general, because MVVM isn't always the simplest thing to tackle. But we're going to try very hard to keep it simple. And that goes back to don't delve into animations. That goes into using Caliburn Micro, not just building our own, and keeping the functionality roughly the same. That they're all focused on, let's keep this thing simple and not try and build this monstrous thing. And whether you're building an application like Tournament Tracker just for yourself, or whether you're building an application in production, for production at your company, that number 6 is really important. The quickest way to derail and kill a great project is to add complexity. Because it's really natural. You're looking at, say, what, we could do this, we could do that. And you kind of dream, and you dream big, and you have these great ideas. The problem is that those ideas can sometimes drain away the resources from getting the actual job done, and in the end, they discourage you because you never seem to reach the end goal, because the end goal is always changing. And so we're really, really trying hard to stick with our scenario, stick with our lane, what we've already built. We're going to try and keep that same lane, same groove, and we're going to try and go from start to finish and get this done, because then you can go back and add more. And that then becomes a separate project and yet another finish, because finishing is very, very important. All right. User interface design. Now, in the previous lesson, in the C# application from start to finish, we spent a couple of videos on designing out our application. We spent one entire video just on the UI design and kind of laid out how things would work. In this series, we're not going to do that as clearly. And there's a reason for it. Because we're going to replicate our existing screens. Now, we'll make allowances for WPF and try and make it a little better. That's always a good thing, to try and make things a little better as you come back to them. But the reality is, we already have our design ideas in place. It's already running. So we don't need to necessarily spend an entire video on designing and drawing out our application. We already have essentially those rough sketches. So we're going to replicate each screen as it makes sense, meaning we're going to look at what's already there and say, you know what? We could change this stuff around a little bit, make it a little better for us. Or we'll say, you know what? We can kind of keep this idea just the same and use it the same way. For example, our main form is going to fit more in the Caliburn Micro's idea of that parent view versus child view, the MDI style. So our main form is going to have a little bit of information, and then that area in the center where it's going to child form, which will change depending on which form we select. So we'll have one parent, and then we'll have the different children come in and leave as it makes sense. So it's a little bit different than our current design, but it still kind of keeps that same flavor. So again, replicate each screen, but as it makes sense. Number 2, we're going to review the screen and identify how to translate it. Meaning there may be things on a screen that just don't fit the way you want to use things in WPF. Or it may be that that's a direct correlation. And so we'll at least review it and identify how to translate it. So, and this is what we're talking about in point 1, the parent page should have a list of tournaments, as well as the option to create a new one. So that parent page is always going to have that list of tournaments that are available, but then inside the parent will be a child area that will change depending on which tournament you select, or if you want to create a new tournament. And so we'll see that as we actually build it. Next, all forms will be child forms, the main parent form. So this is kind of important because we're not going to try and have multiple, parent or, kind of sibling relationship forms. We're going to have one parent form. Everything else is going to be children to that one parent. And that's it for our user interface design. So there are kind of tweaks to what we have currently in our WinForm application, but they do keep that same flavor of the application. So we can still see the same structure, the same bones as the WinForm application. All right, so coming up next, we're going to tackle starting up a new project inside our tournament tracker application, starting a WPF application, setting up Caliburn Micro, and getting the foundational stuff in place so that we're ready to start building our forms.